Hello, thank you for inviting me to this Durham EcoFest. I think this is a brilliant idea and I hope it works. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction into some of the ethical issues from my industry and some of the things that you can positively do to help. Just in case I waffled on a bit too much and you got a little bit bored, I thought I'd sit next to this tree bumblebee nest, so if you get a bit bored you can watch the bees. So my name is Simon Berry. I'm an optometrist from Durham. I have my own independent practice, and that means, amongst other things, that I buy spectacle frames and I sell them to the general public. And because of that, I've always been keen on knowing how ethical that product is, because if I promote and sell a product, then I'm effectively endorsing it because it's been done in my name. So a few years ago I developed a questionnaire that we now give to all our suppliers, and I use this as a benchmark to grade how ethical that product is. It asks all the questions about all the different ethical issues about products in our industry. And what I'm going to talk about today is what most people are familiar with in spectacle frames or glasses. So what are the issues? Well, a pair of glasses is something that some people wear every day. It's in close contact with your skin, and yet there's very little information about what is in that product available to the consumer, which is unusual when you consider that all items of clothing that you wear have labels to give you some clue as to what they're made from. Like any other product, we'd like to know what the raw material is and how it's manufactured. Would like to be confident about the factory conditions, would like to know what happens to that product when we dispose of it, whether it could be recycled, and what the carbon footprint of the product is when it gets to the end consumer. Many of these questions are very difficult to find out for spectacle frames, partly because people just don't ask the questions, so the frame manufacturers don't think it's relevant to their business. There's a complicated supply chain that gets from the raw materials to the completed frame that you see on the display stand in the opticians. Opticians generally buy frames from frame distributors who buy from frame design companies, and these in turn buy their product from manufacturing factories that source the raw materials from producers. In my experience, it's very difficult to try and trace a product back to the original producer because the frame distributors rarely have direct contact with the factories from which their product is sourced. And then the supply chain gets even more complex when different manufacturers make different parts of the frame, so the front, the hinges or the nose pads. They could have been made anywhere and then assembled in a separate factory. And this obviously increases the amount of travel or frame miles that the product has undergone before it reaches the consumer, and increases the carbon footprint of the product. It also highlights one of the issues in frame manufacture. So spectacles are generally marked as being made in one particular country. So for example, Italy has got a very good name in spectacle manufacture. It has a higher price tag if a frame is stamped made in Italy. However, to legally display that tag, only the most expensive part of the production has to be completed in that country. The component parts could have been made anywhere and then sent to that country to be assembled. The carbon footprint of a particular frame has never been properly worked out, partly because there's too many variables. So because of this, I recently started a project with Durham University, and we're hoping to develop a flowchart so that opticians can quickly give a good estimation of the carbon footprint of their product. This has never been done before. Only specialist frames are made in the UK, and even then, the raw material generally doesn't come from the UK. So what about that material? What are the frames made from? So our optical industry has had its fair share of unethical products. We still describe the colour of some frame as being a tortoiseshell colour, and this is a throwback to the days when the natural shell was used in the manufacture. It came from the marine turtle called the hawksbill turtle, which is now critically endangered, and it's thankfully illegal to sell products derived from a shell. There's still a few examples of spectacle frames that are made from natural materials such as horn or wood. We've had lots of wooden glasses in the past. This is an example of a frame made from animal horn. All the horn is ethically sourced, whilst some people might not like the idea of animals that are bred for meat. It does ensure that no part of the animal goes to waste. Any horn that's not used for other industries ends up in landfill. Generally speaking, the horn that's used in our industry comes from the water buffalo. The vast majority of spectacle frames on the UK market are made from man-made materials, though, either plastic or metal. And plastic is obviously a very important environmental issue at the minute. And for people that want to minimise their plastic footprint, there are alternatives. So this is an example of a frame. This is a company called C2C, and they source and make their glasses from 100% recycled marine waste. It's a Belgian company, and they have trawlers that pick up the plastic floating around the oceans. Each frame represents roughly about 10 metres squared of cleared ocean. And I think these are great. But to be honest, in terms of spectacle frames, I don't think that the amount of plastic is necessarily the main issue. You know, the weight of plastic used in a frame is less than in one of my son's Star Wars toys. And generally speaking, the frames have quite a long lifespan. Most people wear the same pair of glasses for years. So it's not like a plastic water bottle that someone's just going to throw away straight away. So I think that the issue is less about the amount of plastic used, but the type of plastic and the amount of waste plastic that's produced in making and displaying the frame. So, for example, most frames have demo plastic lenses in that we just discard when we're going to put the proper lenses in so they don't last very long. And frames are generally cut from big sheets of plastic, which means there's lots and lots of plastic offcuts and lots of plastic waste involved in making the frames. Some companies recycle that waste and some companies don't. This is an example of a company that does recycle. It's a company called Monkey Glasses, and they make little bits of jewellery from the offcuts of the plastic, and all parts of the frame can be recycled. There's other companies. This is a very ethical company called Neubau, and instead of cutting their frames from a sheet, they mould their frames so that there's no plastic waste at all in the Neubau frames. They also use a plastic that's derived from castor oil, and this is one of the few frames that we can trace back to the raw material. We can trace them back to the farms where the castor oil is produced. In terms of more normal plastic frames, a more ethical choice is a plastic called cellulose acetate, because if it's generally made from a source of plant cellulose, either cotton or wood pulp, and if it's pure cellulose acetate, then the material is relatively ecologically friendly since it biodegrades after about 100 years. However, I'm sure you realise cost is a big issue to the consumer, and there are lots of cheap frames out there using cheaper plastics, petroleum-based plastics, or plastics that we just don't know what the raw material is. And the problem is it's very difficult to tell a pure cellulose acetate frame from a petroleum-based plastic just by looking at it. For example, this is a cellulose acetate frame, and this is a petroleum-based frame. And you really can't tell the difference. Some people say that petroleum-based frames have a greasier feel to them, but I've been doing this for 25 years and I can't tell the difference. You do get an indication with price tag. Pure cellulose acetate frames tend to be over £100, more or less. Metal frames can be, again, made from a host of different materials. The cheaper ones are made from nickel alloys, which can range in nickel content from 10% up to 70%, and they're often coated in an attempt to avoid skin irritation. More expensive metal frames can be made from stainless steel, aluminium, titanium or gold. Titanium is classed as one of the more ecologically friendly materials because it's in developed countries. There are stringent regulations about how that it's mined. This is a brand called Lindbergh. They hand make their glasses in Denmark. All parts of this are 100% titanium, there's no screws. And they get their titanium from America, so it's a relatively short production line, so America to Denmark to the UK. Both plastic and metal frames can also include chemical additives such as dyes, glues, UV inhibitors and lacquer, and none of this chemical information is offered to the opticians buying the frames or to the consumer. And the last thing just to mention is that I've recently seen quite a bit of greenwashing in our industry. So being seen to produce an ethical product is now worth something. So some companies are making efforts to make themselves look green. For example, recycled stainless steel sounds good, but actually takes more energy and water in making the frame than if you were making the steel from scratch. So these are complex issues, and as ethical consumers, you have to be careful about the glossy advertising. So if you want to be proactive and start to make a difference for my industry, very simple. Ask the question. Ask what your glasses are made from and where they came from. Your optician probably won't know the answer, but if you persist, then they'll have to go back to their supplier, who will have to go back to the manufacturers. Once the consumer cares, the manufacturer will care. And that's the only way that everything will become more transparent. Thanks for listening and enjoy your day.